Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Passion's Price podcast. On this podcast, we explore the various topics around passion and the price that it costs when we pursue our dreams and ambitions. Today, we want to specifically focus on relationships and entrepreneurship. There's a quote that exists that speaks about, the fact that ambitious people generally, they either have a supportive partner or they have no partner at all. And on today's episode, I really want to explore this topic. So let's begin by just talking about who an entrepreneur is, right? For the most part, we are people who create opportunities, we manage possibilities, and we assume the risks of what it is to create a business or to execute an idea. We are driven by possibility and that possibility evoking change. Most of us are workaholics, right? We don't mind putting in the time to accomplish the goals that we see in front of us. We love to take risk because obviously with no risk, there is no reward. We do like to control the narrative. Entrepreneurs have a strong need to control. And sometimes that can be a challenge when you talk about compromising, right? Which most relationships require. We are intensely focused on accomplishing our goal. So much so that it drives us. So much so that some of us lose sleep when we really think about what our goals are and how we're going to accomplish them. We value an enormous sense of independence. We want to be able to do it on our own. We were able to create this vision on our own, and we want to be able to create the result in the same way. A lot of times that comes with a lot of stress, anxiety, uncertainty, and emotional strain. Because we are human, right? And when we're dreaming of these ideas and these things that we want to execute, there's a distance between the vision and the reality. And throughout that journey, there is obviously an enormous amount of stress. We really are unicorns, but there is an intense idea around vision and reality, right? We develop a sense of impatience because we know that what we touch and what we can create can also become a reality. And so there's a test of patience that we all go through on this journey of entrepreneurship that sometimes can be conflicting while we are at the same time building and maintaining a relationship. So, we are challenging, right? There is an enormous aspect of who we are that requires a lot from another individual. And that goes without saying. I always say, I take this on even personally. We are difficult to love because it requires a special person. It requires a ton of empathy, open and honest communication, and really the ability to prioritize time and a sense of awareness, right? And so as we explore this topic of relationships and entrepreneurship, let's talk about what it is or who a supportive partner is and what's required to be in a successful relationship. In my opinion, a partner who understands and supports their partner's entrepreneurial ambitions has the ability to love through the journey of entrepreneurship. Understanding each level of success or failure will require an enormous amount of patience, understanding, and trust, right? And as we kind of break that down, it's really about, do you love me enough to love me when I'm struggling? Do you love me enough to love me when I'm building, even though you may not understand? Do you love me enough to respect the vision that I have, even though you don't see it the same way? Those are true and honest conversations, right? These are true and honest reflections that are necessary in loving an entrepreneur. Do you have the ability to emotionally, mentally, and financially support no matter what the individual is going through, right? So, can you be emotionally supportive without truly understanding what it is that I'm going through, right? Can you actually see me as the person separate from the journey and give me the emotional support that I need to actually build me up to keep going? Do you have enough foresight? Do you love me enough to mentally support me, to provide me with a sense of confidence and respect within myself that I can endure and continue to explore the level of tenacity that it takes to build a business? Do you understand the financial aspects of the business that I'm building? Can you actually hold down home without complaining about it? And can you still support me financially when needed? That takes a lot, right? And without saying, it is oftentimes imbalanced. I think most entrepreneurs don't set out that way. Our ultimate idea around an ideal partnership is one-sided a lot of the time, but it is not with malice. It is not intentional. It is honestly what is required when you're loving an entrepreneur. And again, we are difficult to love because most human beings find it difficult to coexist in a reality of imbalance. And it is almost a level of sacrifice within itself. There's an idea around admiring someone for their ambition, right? Understanding exactly what ambition is, right? In the idea of what it is that makes an ambitious person ambitious. It takes a lot, right? And it comes with the good, the bad, and the ugly. But can you still endure an admiration for the tenacity that it requires and the bravery that an individual has to pursue their dreams and passion, recognizing that this individual is pretty special and pretty incredible to have the qualities that are key for setting the foundation to love an entrepreneur? There's a lot of emotion that happens in a relationship naturally, right? We are each individuals. And when you think about forming a relationship, it requires a level of compromise, but it also requires, honestly, some realness, right? And when you meet someone, there are things that you recognize right away that you love about that person. There are sometimes qualities in which you don't naturally possess. So you're drawn to it almost like a light. But do you ever take a step back to really think about, okay, I'm attracted to this person and I love everything about them. It's exciting that they're an entrepreneur. It's interesting that they have these dreams and these visions. It's phenomenal that they're able to create a sense of reality through these visions, right? These amazing events. They know all these great people. People are drawn to them. They have an enormous amount of insight and sense of community. I love that about them. But sometimes those very things are the things that you begin to dislike about that person when you're in relationship. That admiration for ambition is the initial attraction, right? But as you become engrossed in this relationship, and this person is still on their journey of entrepreneurship, then there comes about the question of, are you willing, open, and able to support physically, right? Do you have the ability to help them when they're working on a project? Can you create a poster? Can you send out a post? Can you help them acquire customers? What is it that you can do to show not only do you admire their ambition, but you believe in them and you believe that what it is that they are creating can be successful? And are you consistent in that effort? Because that is a form of love. You know, I've seen a lot of relationships and obviously been through a lot. Sometimes when we talk about relationships, especially in this social climate where there are options and various definitions of what relationship is, right? Some people believe that relationships should be monogamous. Some feel like it shouldn't be, and they don't believe in the idea of monogamy. And so, why should they sacrifice or compromise so much just in the idea of happiness, right? But the reality is, happiness exists before we become one. Happiness exists as an individual through form of reflection, growth, and understanding of oneself. Happiness does not come from another individual. Happiness is not born through relationship. Happiness exists individually before we form a union. And so a lot of times, the things that we're attracted to make us happy, right? We're attracted to this person because we think that who they are and what they represent and what they are able to bring to the relationship makes us happy. But the reality is, if we're not happy on our own as individuals prior to forming a union with that individual cannot give us happiness, right? And so when we talk about successful relationships, let's really deep dive into what they require. Obviously, goal alignment, right? Being able to actually share the same common goals and values. This allows us to manage our expectations and foster a mutual support for one another, right? And that term mutual should not be taken lightly, right? We should stand 10 toes down on what it is that we envision for our lives together, also as individuals. And we should be able to still stand 10 toes down on what it is that is required for mutual support. You know, there's differences in long-term goals sometimes, and priorities sometimes lead to incompatibility over time, right? So sometimes it's important to consistently revisit what those goals and aspirations are, both individually and as a couple, because they obviously evolve, such as life, right? And sometimes when that time or that prioritization does not happen, we're not able to really continue to be compatible, because then we start to see the world different. We start to set different goals, and then there's an absence of that communication to enforce or confirm that alignment. You know, statistics show that due to pressure and time commitments associated with entrepreneurship, divorce rates are higher compared to more traditional careers. And that's because, you know, it's easier to mutually support each other if you each have careers that are outside of yourselves, in that it's not a business that you created, but it's a career that you actually went to school to pursue, climbed up the corporate ladder, whatever it is. But there is a statistic drawn to, or that speaks to, the differences in terms of pressure, and the fact that traditional careers, as it relates to relationships, tend to have a more successful result than an entrepreneur relationship. To be successful in a relationship requires an intense focus that is sometimes impossible to change, especially in the beginning. The focus often requires or creates neglect of the personal relationship, creating a tension and sometimes space for even infidelity, right? So a lot of times as we're building these businesses, we don't realize that we are not prioritizing in the right order. There is constantly an imbalance that emotionally sometimes is seen as neglect. That neglect can set a foundation for incompatibility, but it also can set the stage for infidelity, especially when there is a need for outside validation. And so, you know, in as we explore this idea of relationship, it's important to be aware of these things. I always say communication is the glue that keeps all things together. It's essential, right? We cannot exist without communication. And communication is a growing, learning ability. And I think a lot of times we lose sight of that, right? How we communicate when we were 20 years old versus how we communicate when we're 50 years old should be completely different, right? Because there's a 30-year difference in who we were and who we've grown to be and who we are now. And your sense of awareness changes. Your ability to communicate based on your audience changes. There are experiences that we've had throughout our life that gives us perspective to communicate differently. And so the ability to be open to that learning, to understand truly what communication is and what effective communication is really key in how we maintain healthy relationships. It's so interesting because being an entrepreneur, of course, I have entrepreneur friends. I also have friends that are couples who are together, who are married, who are successful in balancing all of the components that we just discussed. And most of the time, there's a commonality, right? They have shared goals. They work towards common business objectives that can strengthen their partnership. It fosters a sense of teamwork and unity, not only in their business, but in their relationship. There's a clear role delineation, and sometimes it sets clear boundaries, allowing for a true partnership while setting the framework for effective communication. It's so interesting because, oftentimes, as you reflect on your own experiences, you look at examples of other individuals who are successful where you failed. It's human nature. And as I look at those people who I admire and love dearly, and watch them as their business grows, as their marriage grows, as their relationship gets stronger, I pay attention to the commonalities, because I think it's our way forward, right? We always can thrive as a community when we have positive examples of overcoming the challenges that plague many of us. Studies have shown that successful entrepreneurs often experience emotional support that positively influence overall well-being and performance. So we know that emotional support is necessary for any entrepreneur to be successful. The lack of emotional support can also be detrimental, and that's a fact. And so, when we admire ambitious people, when we are drawn to their light, we have to really think about, am I the person that can give this person what they need emotionally to succeed? Because being in relationship with them means I am a part of, the narrative. I am a part of the equation that helps them to be successful. Can I see outside of myself? Can I sacrifice outside of myself to actually be present and give this person the emotional support that they need? As we talk about these, examples of couples in business together, there's also couples in business separately, right? There's a pro-independence and autonomy and the ability to pursue separate passions and interests, which is great, right? So if we're in a relationship and you give me space and grace to pursue my passions, and I'm able to give you space and grace while you pursue yours, what is the most important aspect of that, right? We want to be able to mutually support one another. When each partner ventures are managed well, it allows space for that, right? It allows us time to show up for each other. It allows us, it even motivates us to want to show up for each other, right? You're there for me, so I'm there for you. There's a reciprocity within that idea, right? But sometimes there is human nature, right, which never will not exist. and there's a sense of competition. There is a sense of jealousy. There are, societal pressures that make this idea sometimes challenging. Studies have shown that successful entrepreneurs often experience the opposite, right? And so you can't be successful if there's not a mutual if there's not mutual respect and if there's not mutual support within your separate business ventures. And so, this is an ongoing conversation where we talk about what is required to love an entrepreneur, right? There's different case scenarios. There is what is required to love an entrepreneur. There is what is the love that is required between two entrepreneurs that are pursuing separate passions and ventures. And then what is it that is required in a marriage where two people come together and pursue a business objective together, right? On this podcast, we will continue to have these incredible conversations about what is passion's price, right? And as we, as entrepreneurs and ambitious people, pursue the dreams and visions that we have for our life, what is the cost? And I think for me personally, this topic on today's episode hit home because as I continue to navigate my own personal journey, my own personal growth through the experience of obviously moving towards divorce, it's interesting because we never had the conversation of what was required. We never even had the conversation of who I am as an entrepreneur in a positive way where I can honestly say that emotional support was ever present. And so although I fought against all the things that make entrepreneurship difficult, within my own relationship, I was fighting my own battles as it relates to the lack of emotional support. And so going into this new chapter of my life, it's important that any new relationship that I enter into, it is a clear expectation that this is who I am. And although I am aware, a lot more aware of how to create balance within the reciprocity that I expect, there still needs to be that conversation, right? That communication, that foundation set of clear expectations so that we can actually mutually support one another. And that's going to be the end of our podcast today. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great and amazing day and stay tuned for episode 3 coming soon.